9:04, and today is March 24th, and welcome to the Board of Education virtual Byram Hills Board of Education meeting. And I would ask for a motion to call a meeting to order.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
I don't think you need a motion for that, actually.
Oh, yeah, you're probably right. Long day. So why don't we stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, so the board met in executive session, and actually there's going to be a revision to the agenda because 2.1 Board of Education matter board officers was not discussed, but we discussed two matters that were added to the agenda. The first one is Board of Education matter, district matter, individual employee. And then the second one that we spoke about was the BHAA matter, negotiation, contract negotiation. Those were the two matters that were discussed. And with that, I would ask if there are any comments from anyone on the line from the public regarding any agenda item regarding any item that is not on the agenda.
Tim?
Sorry, there's no items, no questions from the public.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So with that, I would ask for a motion to vote on the consent agenda, item 6, personnel, 7, special services, and 8, business.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. So we go to an exciting item, which is new business 9.1, transportation study that we commissioned a few months ago. And this is exciting that we can get at least the initial report, which was actually quite substantive and voluminous and had a number of different suggestions. So with that, I turn it over to Jen.
Okay, great. Thank you. The board remembers that we have been really focusing on student wellness and student health. And in that endeavor, after our information came back to us from Stanford University, talking to us about our children, particularly at the middle school and high school level, the little amount of food they were getting, coupled with all of the studies that are coming out from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Medical Association about the importance of student sleep, particularly at those ages and the different sleep cycles that these kids are going through. The board was very proactive in asking if we should be looking at school start times. And I'm saying this really for the betterment of the public who might be coming into this a little bit later. And in the board's wisdom, they decided that the first thing to do would be to look at a transportation study. We hired a company called Transfinder, who is a reputable company in the area and has done this work with other school districts. And we asked them to take a 3-pronged approach for us. The first approach is just to look at our organization of transportation and to be able to tell us what are some of the things we need to improve upon in that transportation organization. The second piece was an efficiency piece, which you'll see a little bit of today, talking about our efficiencies and how can we actually make the bus runs more efficient. Why is that beneficial? Well, if we could reduce student time in the morning waiting for a bus and create some efficiencies in doing so, we may be able to A, save the district money, and B, help our kids get up a little bit later without actually even fluctuating school start time. And then the third component of it is really looking at school start times. And if the board, after all efficiencies are put into place, could figure out a way to extend our school start time, meaning start our high school and middle school at a different time, potentially even impacting elementary school, what would that look like? And would there be a cost to the district? Would there be a savings to the district? And can we actually do this for children? And this came on the cusp of a few meetings, board meetings last year, where I presented different information to the board about how school start times is affected how that affects things that are happening after school, the after school activities that we take kids to, how it affects athletics and all of that. And so I think we got to the point that we realized that we needed a professional in transportation logistics to really come in and take a deep dive. So from Transfinder, we have T. Doolin, who's here with us, who's going to be presenting some components of his report. Remember the three parts: first, looking at the organization; second, looking at efficiency; and the third, looking at potential school start times. So, T, are you there? Kelly, is he here? He's on. T, you're muted.
I'm trying to get in touch with them now.
Okay. Well, I could even start a little bit by talking about the report. I think what he'll take us through first is there are some recommendations, and you'll see it's a pretty lengthy report. I think it's about 50 pages. There are some recommendations of things that we could do, recommendations and commendations at the bus garage right now, which are great for us to look at. Remember that we have a new transportation
I'm
supervisor.
getting some bad feedback on that, Jen.
Are you getting a lot of feedback?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Is it me? You said? Let me see.
Maybe if people mute and then unmute, it might help.
Oh, Lara.
Why is it me?
You have to mute. It's at the bottom of your screen.
Now I'm on my phone because
Oh, is your computer also on, Lara?
no, I turned it off now. I tried to get back on my computer for the new meeting and I couldn't.
No,
You
that's
turned
not
off the
fine.
video. You need to turn off the microphone.
No, I don't know why, but I think it's fine now.
I think it's
Is
okay.
Is it okay now?
Sounds better. Yeah, you can't have two microphones or speakers on in the same
Right.
room.
I shut the computer one off.
Better
so
now. Yep.
Let me know if that's okay.
Nope, it's good now. Thanks.
I'll put it down.
Yeah, Kelly's trying to call him now. Kelly, do you have the report to put up? Yeah, why don't we do that? Because I think I want to show two specific slides to give the board an idea, and I'm sorry, Kelly will try to get him on for us.
It's feedback again.
Can you see the report?
No, I see you.
I see it. You might have to click on presenting. Getting feedback.
You don't see it. You're presenting?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay.
Oh, you do, and I do not.
That's it. Now it worked.
Jen, click on Kelly presenting if you can see him. If you click on the people at the upper right, and then look for Kelly's presentation. It says Kelly Siebert presentation in parentheses. Or unpin whatever on your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see it at all. And T left the meeting.
Here.
Here?
Presenting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ah,
He's
here
coming
he
back.
is.
He's coming back. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, sure now. Oh, wait, no.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna let him take it over.
Mm-hmm. Hi, T. It's Jen Lamia. Are you in?
He is, but he's muted. He has to
You are
unmute.
muted.
Jen, do you have the ability to unmute him?
No, I just tried.
No.
Oh, he sent it.
Oh, he can't hear either. He says, he just added a comment that he can't hear.
Kelly, do you want to try to get him in through his phone?
He may have, if he can't hear us and we can't hear him, he probably has the mute button on his computer turned off.
Mhm.
Not the one on the, not the Zoom mute, the one on the actual laptop.
Yeah, I'm writing him. I can chat with him in the comments.
Ah, there he is. Hi, T. He should be in now. He's unmuted.
Hello? He's unmuted here. He might not be on his computer. Hello? Hear the test audio, but nothing in the meeting.
Okay. So Kelly, why don't you, do you mind coming over here and we'll take a look at your screen and I'll at least take the board through a couple of slides that you and I discussed would be important for T. And Tim, if you can get him on, great. But if not, we're just going to keep going and we'll bring him into the next meeting next week. So I think first of all, a couple of the, oh, two computers too close together.
I'll put it on.
A couple of the regarding the organization, there were a bunch of commendations and recommendations that were important. First of all, he was talking about the efficiency and safety of our camera systems that are at the bus garage. He indicated that all the bus drivers and aides are receiving all of the federal and state mandatory training. So this report for us was beneficial because it was sort of like our audit of the bus garage, which you don't ordinarily have. Drivers observed following best practices while loading and unloading students. So this was that part of the audit. Recommendations, increase communications between the district and the transportation department, like student, and that was regarding student referrals. So he even went as deeply as, is there a bus driver who's making a referral to a building administrator about a student behavior on a bus? And is there good articulation back and forth so that the bus driver knows the child was spoken to and necessarily what the next steps are if that incident should occur again. So those are good organization pieces and sort of management and functioning pieces. He did say, give us a recommendation of how to look for additional drivers, because as we know, schools are always struggling with looking for new drivers. If I can take you to some of his findings. So he started reviewing routes. And if you're following with me, you're on about page 6 right now. For the bus routes, a map that you probably can't really distinguish what is where, but you'll see that and unfortunately, this looks like coronavirus map, right? Where things are like all these circles of these clusters. But what you see in these 3 circles is the review of routes. And what he was indicating to us is that he saw overlaps of certain routes, meaning I am a driver and I'm crossing over this route, this roadway. There is another driver who's actually crossing over that same roadway. So why are we repeating some of that? Why do we have some of that crossover? And that was a question about efficiency that he had. Could we look at those routes so we don't have any street crossovers and any redundancies like that? And some of the time we can't really avoid that. For example, there might be the fact that a bus can't turn around because, it's a dead end street. So we have routes that are going in different directions in order to be able to turn safely. That's mostly what we're caught up with that. But in reviewing the routes, he thinks that he could look at that so that we have a significant amount of less overlap on those streets. He also said his recommendation to consider rerouting to remove significant route overlaps, which I think is valid to look at, although we can probably explain why most of them are that way, but he may have a better understanding being in transportation logistics. The second finding was the district doesn't have a formal walk to stop distance policy. Well, this is certainly something the board is going to have to ask. Do you really want kids to walk farther distances to their bus stops that are more in accordance with law, so that we can spend less on transportation? And I don't know that that's something that this district has ever made a priority before or will in the future. So his recommendation was adopt a policy that asks kids to walk further. Now, these are not things he's recommending we do. They're things he's recommending for the sake of efficiency if the board would want to do that. The third recommendation by page 8 is redesigning routes to reduce the number of stops on each route, increase the time between the beginning and dismissal bells to allow for routes to have increased ridership. He is noting, and that's where I want to take you next because that's significant. He is noting on page 11, if you take a look at the yellow charts, the high school, middle school PM riders versus bus capacity, you'll notice down the left-hand column, it's the percent of the manufacturer's rated capacity. So if you take a look at the first dot that is in that square, in that rectangle on page 11, that is the high school, middle school 2 PM, that's bus number 2. What he's saying is that bus is at 60% capacity and that all of these other buses are at a much lower capacity. Well, that's true in a district like ours. We have to account for every rider, whether or not they ride the bus. So when those routes are set up, they actually have children assigned to those seats and would be at their capacity. The truth is, this is a PM ridership. So why aren't we at capacity? Well, we have kids who play sports. We have kids who drive, like there are a variety of reasons. For the sake of running a school district, though, in the event of an emergency, I've got to put every child's body on a bus. So I need to know that we have enough buses to transport that way. So that's a little bit of the conundrum that we run into. If you take a look at Wampus PM ridership on page 12, you'll see that we're not falling in that 60, 70, 80% zone for any one of the buses except barely one. And that is partially because we have like 900 times in the course of a week that a Coleman Hill or Wampus or Crittenden kid is getting on an activity bus, right? So they are getting shuttled to activities, which is not in here. So basically what he's trying to tell us is that he thinks that our next steps are going to be to look at how we can make some of those runs more efficient to build up that capacity so that we have more buses that are in that middle range. And he can try to simulate that without actually changing transportation, and give us a sense in the next meeting of what is that going to look like. If he could change some of those routes and create more efficiency and get more ridership on each of the buses, then we will be able to look at that.
Jen, can I just chime in one quick question?
Sure.
I don't think it's to anybody's surprise that this is essentially showing that the bulk of our routes are, way under target ridership, and the buses aren't being utilized nearly to the capacity that they could be utilized.
Right.
Right. That's the takeaway, which is not a surprise, but it's great to see it graphically depicted. And, for me, it's underutilization,
Yeah, it is. It's underutilization. And the question is, what do we do in the event of a crisis where we have to get these kids out in these buses, right? So we have to make sure that we're prepared for that also, which does, we should send buses out with low ridership all the time. I think we should make those adjustments. But maybe doing some of the rerouting would enable that to happen. And that would also come with, we'd have to really establish how far we want these kids to be walking to bus stops, which, we don't necessarily want to increase that. When you get, yeah, go ahead.
I have
Sorry,
Theo.
I'm not watching. I'm looking at the charts. So
I have Theo on my phone, so he's here if you need him to answer any questions.
Jen, is it possible to have parents commit like at the beginning of the summer, sign a form that says I'm opting in or I'm opting out of the bus route so that we know, up front whether or not someone's going to be taking the bus. Because so many of the parents drive their kids, but we're still having to factor them in because we have no way of knowing.
Kelly, is that a possibility with like New York State law and busing to have them opt out?
Yes, it is a possibility. However, if there's circumstance where they need to use the bus on any particular week, we got to have that option for them. So if we take them off a route and then, something happens, we have to readjust that entire route, which will affect every student on that bus if we're adding a student that needs transportation. So if at the beginning of the year we make that adjustment, it's fine. But when the year starts, unless that student is in the beginning of the route or the end of the route, it's going to have a significant effect on the entire route as a whole.
And we're just going to need some guidance as to what to do in the event of a mass evacuation, right? Like how can we still manage that number? Which there could very well be an answer to that. So. And next, if you go to page 14 and 15, I thought those were pretty interesting. Starting with 14, those are the trip lengths. So what he's trying to show us, that's just the general lengths for high school, middle school. What he's trying to show us by page 15 is if you take a look at Wampus, this is what he used to help him see, how can I butt buses up to each other? How can I butt runs up to each other? And if you take a look, any of the high school and middle school bells, if you see the Wampus AM trip lengths, he gives a delineation of when the bell is going to occur. And that becomes significant on 17. This is really the one I want to show you. 17 shows Wampus, Coman Hill, and the high school, middle school. If you take a look on that page, you'll see where the Wampus bell is. Like, let's take a look at MS 23, which is the third one down. You'll see that by the time Wampus bell occurs at the end of the day, that bus is finished beforehand. It ends its run at the end of the red, and then it needs some blue time to get back to the building. But you'll see the number of buses with our current schedule that can never get to Wampus, can never get to Coman Hill, that run a high school, middle school run. So when we're doing that second set of runs, we're not running all of those same buses necessarily. So what he would have to do is figure out what could a schedule look like. And essentially it means playing with the bell times at 4 different buildings in order to get enough of these runs in and to be doing double runs and not having a bus that does one run and can't do another. So what we looked at, if you take a look on page 19, he came up with a couple of options. This option moves the high school and middle school times back by 15 minutes, but leaving the elementary as it is. This was the proposal that, not proposal, but one of the options that I gave to the board. If students arrive at the high school at 7:30 and they begin at 8 o'clock, so if we move the high school, what does that mean as far as trip lengths? And the blue on the chart where you see the lines go red and then they turn into blue, the blue is really telling us that they're not going to be able to turn around in time for the other schools. So that leaves us with a quandary. And what I asked T to do is to come back to us at the next meeting when he can talk to us more about efficiencies, what he can do for efficiencies, and then if those efficiencies were put into place, what he can do about school start times. And I said, well, I'm kind of wondering about Wampus and Coman Hill, of them being opening at different times. So we have the high school and the middle school very close together, and we have those kids riding a bus together. What would it look like if we put the Coman Hill and Wampus kids closer together and riding buses together and changing those bus routes around? And I'm not saying we want to do that, but what does that actually look like? Of course, you have the one negative that comes to mind right away is my child going to be on the bus a little bit longer because now they do a Wampus drop off before they go to Coman? And maybe we don't want that for elementary school. but it's still good for us to look at what all of these options are. So I asked him to look at that option as well. So you'll notice with the 15 minutes, we run into trouble with the 15 minutes. And you could see that clearly on page 20. That gives you an idea of what WAMPUS is like. So WAMPUS is AM trip length. You'll see that it extends beyond the high school, middle school bells. If we were to move the high school by 15 minutes, I did this in a different fashion when I showed it to the board last year, but it's showing that it's not possible, we know, just to move the high school, middle school 15 minutes later. It interferes with that. And then the Coman Hill AM trips, you know, where are they going to be hitting the bells also? So then when you get to page 22, the high school, middle school PM trip lengths, you'll see that the high school and middle school, if they release 15 minutes later, how that messes with the WAMPUS bells and the Coman Hill bells. So essentially at the end of the day, he's going to have to look at a reconfiguration of all 4 buildings of time in order to get those buses to be able to meet both runs, middle school runs and high school runs, because we're certainly not going to add all of these buses so that the time can be more convenient. It's just not cost efficient. You know, what's the point of doing an efficiency if you're going to then turn around and spend millions of dollars on buses? So I'm sure that is not what the plan will be, but he'll run a bunch of configurations for us next time. I was hoping that he would be explaining this today to you and not me. But I think I would like to have him try to start looking at the efficiencies, especially of those routes where we're crossing over routes, see what he could come up with that. I don't recommend that we change that we necessarily increase the distance from kids' homes to bus stops. I can ask him to put that in there, but I'm pretty sure the board's going to look at that at the end, and we're going to determine that, you know, that's not really the message that we want to make. And then the third thing I want him to do is reconfigure those 4 buildings schedules, start times, with Coman Hill and WAMPUS together and with Coman Hill and WAMPUS separate, to see how can we do it and still try to get at least the 15 minutes out of the morning. So, I spoke a lot. Any questions? That wasn't even my presentation. Everyone's on mute, so if anybody's asking me anything, I can't hear you.
I'll ask you a question. What do you see as the next steps now?
So I think the next steps are, first, we have to focus on efficiency. I want to know that we have the most efficiently run bus garage before we start to make changes in school start times. But I want to, as that efficiency is rolling out, as he's starting to tell us these specific measures we can take with bus routes, as he's starting to tell us that, I want him to start projecting this school start time thing for us so we could continue to keep that in the forefront of our mind as we're working on these efficiencies.
I mean, does this take into account enrollment trends?
Right. So, no, I mean, we haven't done much. We've done some rerouting because of enrollment, but essentially we still have kids scattered across the same square mileage. So it's not that that's affected very much how we've been running these buses. There are times where we don't have children in a certain area anymore. There are also times where we don't have, you know, when you have like kids who are out of district, for example, you have to be within a certain mileage of the school for us to transport you out of district. There are other kids who can go who are too far. They're connected. They can come to a connection point and we can drive them because we have an anchor child. Sometimes that anchor child goes away and we wind up not transporting the rest of the kids because they're not in the range that we're supposed to. So we do make those changes. I don't want you to think that we've had the exact same bus routes regardless of student enrollment, but it's really only when there are no kids in that area being picked up that we've gotten rid of a bus route. So I think if the board is comfortable, I don't know if the board wants T to try to attend at our next meeting, or if the board is comfortable. Kelly and I have met with him twice already about this report. And I feel comfortable that I'd like him to start looking at the efficiencies and then give us some options once he has those efficiencies calculated.
Is that part of his present scope?
Yes.
Okay.
Makes sense to me. Does everyone agree?
Right.
Great.
Yeah, no, it's within his scope, so you should go ahead with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right.
We will learn more. We knew this would be a long learning process.
All right.
Sorry, can I just chime one thing? Kelly or Jen, was there any surprises out of here that I thought it was great to graph the capacity issue because that was as an instinct of mine. Was there anything that jumped out at the two of you that you was like, that was something you didn't expect?
I would say that the thing that I didn't expect is the number of buses that are stopped after the morning bus routes for the high school, middle school. Like I wasn't expecting that to happen, that, a high school, middle school run can't actually do a Wampus run. It has to do a Coman Hill run. So we're losing some buses in this process by having sometimes double tiered, sometimes triple tiered busing.
Right.
And that in itself is not as efficient as I thought maybe it would be.
Interesting.
And the crossing over, I know that a lot of it could probably be explained, but there's probably some of it that can't be explained. It doesn't seem to make sense to watch this 3 different buses cross over the same path every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for T though? Because he is on Tim's phone. I mean, or are you comfortable moving ahead with what I've said?
I'm comfortable going to the next step.
Okay.
Me too.
Okey-doke.
All right.
All right.
So with that, we thank you, T, if you can hear us. Going over to budget hearing 3.
All right. So I will start with budget hearing 3. Tonight, Kelly's going to be talking to us about athletics, operations and maintenance, transportation services, and revenue. If you go to the second slide, you'll see that we are in budget hearing 3, which is a time really for the public to be asking questions, which is why even though with open meetings law, we don't have to have a question answer session necessarily on this meeting tonight, but we did post on the website a phone number to call in questions to, and Tim Kaltenecker's manning that, and will tell us if there are any questions related to the budget. And those questions do inform budget hearing 4 and any final changes we make, and then budget adoption on April 21st. Budget hearing 5 on May 5th is going to be review the proposed budget for one last time. And then of course there's the vote on May 19th. Now it's interesting because we're looking out to May and we are talking about a budget vote. What's interesting is that the Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents, the Lower Hudson Council Education Coalition, have come together and are asking in this, school closure time, and we're not sure what's going to even happen with budget votes. Should we be moving more to the municipal model for school budget approvals, which would really mean, and this is what they are asking for. Some people are asking to really move the budget votes later. But Lower Hudson Education Coalition is asking for a municipal model. That means that provided we are not exceeding the cap, that we are allowed as a school district to adopt the next budget without going out for a vote. So that is what this organization is proposing. They're also proposing that school board elections be canceled for the spring of 2020, and that any incumbents will remain through to the next year, and we will basically hold people over in their current positions for a full year until we could do a May vote in 2021. So that's what the Lower Hudson Education Coalition is asking for. So when I say that the voting date is May 19th, we're hoping the voting date is May 19th. We're hoping we're all back here and able to do that. But there are different groups with very different opinions about what should happen in the event we're not able to do that physical voting. So
Yeah.
more to come on that.
I think the State School Board Association, if I'm not mistaken, and definitely the PTA, they, I guess, have an alternative proposal where they want to move the budget vote via absentee ballot to May, and then elect board members in June, and then elect board members in June as well. So there are all these varying proposals that we just frankly don't have any sense yet of how the state will follow through on the various proposals, but we'll see.
Yeah, I propose that we're back in session at that point. That's my proposition. Would love that. All right, so administration's proposed budget, 2019-20 budget and 2020-21 budget are exactly the same. There's been a 0% budget to budget increase. Remember that we had the support of a bond that we finished our last payment, and that is what is enabling us to retain a 0% budget to budget increase, which we're very happy about. And Kelly is now going to start with interscholastic athletics and an explanation of some of those budget lines.
Thank you. The proposed budget for athletics will continue to support all our programs that we currently have in place. The budget currently supports 21 sports, 59 athletic teams, and 96 coaching positions. The high school participation numbers range between 25 and 40%, depending on the season. Middle school, similar numbers between 25 and 30%. The proposed budget allows us to continue to provide a quality program of educational-based athletics. The overall health and safety of our students is and will continue to be the forefront of everything that we do. We assess our athletic programs, facilities, equipment on an annual basis and make updates where we believe they best meet the needs of our students. In terms of increases on a year-to-year basis, a salary increase of 1.9% based on our contractual increases for coaches and staff. An increase of $18,000 for equipment. We are replacing a lot of equipment in the fitness center, including treadmills. So that's why there's an increase in terms of equipment. The contractual increase of 5% is related to additional expenses associated with homecoming, rental lights, security, and supervision for athletic events. BOCES, that 3.9% increase, those are associated with Section 1 fees and additional fees associated with BOCES for officiating. And then finally, an increase of $5,700 in materials and supplies. Your annual increase in supply costs, as well as some replacement of uniforms for the next year based on the schedule. So
Kelly?
overall, a 4.4% increase budget to budget for athletics.
Kelly, I have a question. Salaries, or is the salaries limited to salaries for coaches, or is there more to salaries than that?
Salaries, athletic director, training staff. Yep.
And coaches.
Yes, coaches. Yes.
So
That's the
athletic.
majority of this number.
So Rob's salary's in there together with the trainers and the coaches and the assistant coaches?
Yep.
Okay. And are there any salaries in the contractual and other line item?
No, I don't think so.
So
So
contractual and other, I believe, are the referees and everything else, right, Kelly?
Oh, those are
What's
BOCES.
it-
Those are from BOCES.
Is it like renting the rinks and
Yeah.
getting full time?
Yep.
Does the hockey rink go in there and the, what
Yes.
about the money we spend to keep the fields? Is that in this budget or that's in the operation of plant budget?
To maintain the fields?
Yeah, like the groundskeeping and the landscaping, what have you,
Yep. It's in maintenance of plant.
operation of plant.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. So operations of plant, the custodial and maintenance staff, the salary increase here at 2.1%. Small increase in terms of equipment. A large decrease in contractual and other. If you remember from the previous board presentation, we've removed the security line from the operation of plants budget, created a new budget code, a safety and security budget code. So that reduction is the removal, and along with the BOCES line as well, the one below it, is the reduction of our security guards, school resource officers, and the BOCES codes for our security consultant. We've removed them from this budget code, the operation of plant, and created a new budget code for safety and security. So overall, it's a decrease in this section of 8.8%. Maintenance of plant increase, 2.5% increase for our maintenance and ground staff. The increase on equipment, 28% increase in equipment, is the replacement of a truck and a van. For the staff members, we have vehicles now that are beyond their useful life, so we need to replace those two vehicles. That's why there's an increase in terms of equipment. Contractual and other, an 18% increase. This is additional expenses associated with maintaining our boilers, HVAC, our turf, elevators, the bus wash, among many different mechanical items that we service on an annual basis. And then finally, an increase in material and supplies, again, anticipated based on our expenses going forward. Finally, in terms of maintenance plant, is our capital asset preservation plan, our CAP plan. Same amount as the prior year. This summer, we'll be replacing windows at Coleman Hill, making some repairs and replacement of a roof section at HCC. We'll also be addressing paving and widening the high school parking lot. We'll be expanding the entrance, adding an additional lane to address the issues with pickup and dismissal, similar to what we did at Wampus in terms of adding that lane to mitigate that issue.
Where's that lane going to go?
At the top of the high school, it's going to be, it's not exact spec what we're going to do, but it'll essentially start where the curve is at the top of the high school. We'll add a lane to the right, and there'll be a spot where people can line up, and people will be able to go through as well. They'll be able to drive through to the parking lot.
Yeah, Ira, we've been told time and time again that this egress, this single egress, is narrow for people to be coming in and going out at the same time. Like, we've received that recommendation.
I remember the discussion, but now we're going to add is it a right turn lane? What are we adding? A right turn only lane up there?
No, just a lane, basically a through lane to the parking lot and a lane for pickup.
Oh, I'm sorry, coming down the curve.
Yes.
Down, yes, I apologize.
Coming down the curve. So what's that going to be? What's going to be lost in that?
That little swampland to the right of the curve, when you come down, there's like a swampy, right?
Yeah.
It's like overrun with reeds, that little area right there.
There's just some drainage as well as a light I think we have to push back. But one of the major issues we're having with that is our buses, when there's a lineup of parents picking up their children, our buses are having to go into the opposite lane, and our security guards are managing that. Not the safest way to pick up our children. This will address that issue, and then people will still have the ability to bypass that lane and that pickup lane and access our playgrounds and our fields during dismissal time. Okay. Transportation services, 4.9% increase in salary. This is associated with basically a budget correction from the prior year. Based on my projections at this point, prior to any changes, our bus drivers were under budget in terms of their hours for compensation. Our bus drivers are hourly employees. So I'm going to make this adjustment in the 2021 school year to correct that issue. And then going forward, we should be at normal increases in terms of salary for our bus drivers. A small increase for equipment.
Sorry, Kelly, just a quick question. The salaries for the bus drivers, that includes total benefits and compensation? Or, I mean, that salaries is total benefits, or is that strictly, just salary?
Strictly salary.
Okay.
And that also includes our maintenance mechanics and our supervisor transportation and all our transportation clerical staff, things that way.
Thank you.
Sure. So again, a small increase for equipment as well as contractual and other, and then a small increase for materials and supplies. But overall, a increase of 4.2% for pupil transportation. Along with transportation services is the garage building. This is basically our maintenance area. Really no increases in terms of that budget, a small increase for contractual and other supplies, keeping flat at 0. So a 1.4% increase for the garage building. No increase for contractual transportation, excuse me. Not something we use a lot, but if we needed to contract out for transportation, we have that budget code to utilize. And then finally, for transportation replacement of vehicles, we've increased that 2.5% along with our replacement of vehicle schedule. We have a couple more than we've had in the past. We're replacing 1 large bus, 4 vans, and 2 minivans this year. So a little increase in terms of vehicles at 2.5%. So moving on to revenue. Now that we covered the expense side, again, quickly, I just want to review the budget and how it's separated into the 3 components: the program, capital, administrative. The largest component being the program. This is the salary, benefits, equipment, supplies, materials for our instructional staff, our teachers, librarians, guidance counselors, nurses, psychologists, our coaches, our bus drivers. And again, this makes up 72.3% of the total budget. The second largest being capital at 16.3%. This is, again, the salary, benefits, so everything associated with custodial maintenance and ground staff. The overall operation and maintenance of our buildings, security, our insurance in terms of property and vehicle, utilities, and debt service. And finally, administrative component, 11.4%. This is the Board of Ed, our district meetings, our budget vote, central office administrators and staff, our other administrators, legal counsel, our auditing services, so everything on that side. So moving into revenue. For our revenue, 89% of our revenue is received from our local taxpayer. The second highest portion is from state aid at approximately 5%. Pilots, payment in lieu of taxes of 3%, and then fund balance of 2%. And 1% is other revenues. This is a small percentage. It includes a county sales tax, tuitions that we receive from other districts, interest earnings, among other small revenues. Okay, so this is a quick review of our tax levy formula. I won't go into much detail, but this is the final result of the maximum allowable tax levy. We have a maximum allowable of 1.5%, which is an increase of a little over $1.2 million maximum. Just some important things to note in this calculation. For this year, kind of a strange year in terms of the formula, a large growth factor, the largest we've ever had at 1.99%. Again, this is just the fact that Swiss Re's pilot expired. They came back on the assessment roll. So we're really experiencing that growth factor this year. I don't anticipate it going forward. The growth factor is kind of a sliding scale. So we might have an increase next year in terms of growth, close to 1%, maybe a little less, because it kind of factors in the couple years behind it, just as a catch up. And then also, I just want to, another important factor in the tax levy is the allowable growth factor, or the consumer price index. We're at 1.81% now. So, below that 2%, which you hear a lot in terms of this formula, you'll hear it referred to as the 2% tax cap. So this year it is lower. It's at the 1.8%. And then just exemptions, you'll see our exemptions went from 6.1 to 4.1, about a $2 million decrease. That's essentially related to the expiration of our bond. We paid off our bond this year, $2.5 million. So we're not going to receive that state aid on that bond for next year. So it's not a huge reduction in terms of state aid. It's a reduction based on we no longer have a bond on the books to receive aid from the state on. Okay, so having that out, let's move on to pilots. So the district currently has 2 pilots, IBM and Ingle Berman, which is approximately $2.7 million. We'll see a decrease in the 2021 school year of $160,000. You'll notice the big shift from 17-18 to 18-19. That's when the Swiss Re pilot expired. So that's when they came back on the rolls officially. We're seeing the growth factor this year. That's what I mean by it kind of catches up after a couple years. So But over the next 3 years, we are going to see a reduction in pilot revenue of $333,000 based on the agreement that was made with IBM. Debt service, you've heard this a couple times. Our debt bond expired this year, so we are not having that bond payment for 2021 school year. We do have one remaining bond that's still sitting on our books. It ends in the 24-25 school year, so 1 year out from this chart. Fortunately, it is callable in the 22-23 school year, so pending the bond market at that time, we'll definitely take a look and see if we can see some savings in the last 2 years of that bond as we try to refinance. To review the tax levy, just a quick explanation of the slide. I know there's a lot going on. On the left side is the dollar amount of the tax levy. The blue bars represent the actual tax levy amount. On the right side is the tax levy percentage. The black bar is the maximum allowable tax levy, and the red is the tax levy that we propose to our taxpayers. Just keep in mind the 12-13 school year was the first year of the tax levy formula. As you can see, there's been a large variation on a year-to-year basis. It's been as high as 4.59% in the 18-19 school year and as low as 0.43% in 16-17. In the case of the 4.9%, there was a large growth factor that year. I know we talked about this year being large, 1.99%, but in that year, the growth factor was 1.0%, which was the highest prior to this year. And then CPI was over 2% that year. So those two factors really helped in terms of the formula, and the Swiss Re pilot expired that year as well. So the exemptions amount changed. So that's what I just want to keep pushing out. These factors that change on a year-to-year basis really can affect the calculation of the tax levy formula. Now, in contrast, the 0.43% in the 16-17 school year, the growth factor was still pretty high. It was around 1%. However, CPI was at 0.12%. So one of the lowest CPIs we've seen in terms of, actually the lowest in terms of this formula, at less than 0.25% CPI at 1.2%. So the district at that year, 16-17, was only able to increase the taxes about $315,000. So again, there's many reasons why the maximum allowable tax levy can be difficult to kind of calculate and push out a couple of years because of these factors that change on a year-to-year basis. So again, the maximum allowable tax levy for the 2021 school year is 1.54%. For tonight, we're proposing a tax levy of 1.4%, which is approximately $115,000 below the max. It's an increase levy to levy of $1,159,554. Since inception of the tax levy, the district has always proposed a tax levy below the maximum allowable formula, and that proposed reduction has been under the maximum allowable tax levy total over the years from 12, including 2020-21, $2.7 million. So here are the numbers for the major categories with revenue. The increase in the tax levy proposed at 1.4%. Again, that's an additional $1.1 million levy to levy. The decrease in pilots, again, associated with the decrease in the IBM pilot of $160,000. That's a 5.8% decrease. Other revenues, we've decreased that approximately $75,000. This is related to your county sales tax that we receive and our interest rate assumptions. We have made some adjustments to those assumptions when the budget process started. It was obviously different factors. We have made some adjustments in the last couple of weeks to address that and reduce the other revenue for next year's budget. State aid, again, we're seeing a decrease of 1.1%, about $54,000. That's really associated with the bond. Again, the bond is coming off, so the aid associated with that bond is lower. So it's not that we're seeing a reduction in state aid as a whole. The reduction is based on no longer having that debt service expense to get aid from.
Kelly, is the estimate of state aid, is that a coronavirus estimate or a pre-coronavirus estimate? Or what?
Yep. So it's pre-corona. Yes, it's based on the governor's run that he's provided in late January, I believe. So the legislatures will be meeting probably now, and it's due before April 1st. The final numbers. I don't know if there will be a delay because of the virus and everything going on right now. So we'll know soon, one way or the other, and then we can make the adjustments if needed in terms of state aid if there is a reduction of some factor. So we still have time to make that adjustment. And having said that, any adjustment or reduction in state aid that we're going to experience will be made up in fund balance. You'll see in the final column there, a decrease in fund balance of 26%. So in order to balance the budget, instead of using $3.3 million in the current year, we're projected to use 2.4. So if there is a reduction in state aid based on the times they're having now, that additional fund in order to balance the budget will come from the fund balance. Okay. So I just want to review fund balance really quickly. Just take a couple minutes. I think it's important for you guys to understand and see where you are in terms of balances at this point. So real quickly, there's 3 types of fund balance, and this is where there's a lot of confusion. There's assigned fund balance, which is basically a portion of the operating budget can be applied to the following year. There's unassigned fund balance. You'll hear this a lot as the 4% fund balance, the maximum. This really has no specific purpose. It can be used in situations such as emergencies at any time. And there's no requirement to have 4%. That is the max. Although, in terms of best practices fiscally, it's best practice to have at least 4% or at max 4% in your budget. And finally, what I want to go into a little further tonight is the restricted fund balance, which is commonly known as reserves, that is established for a specific purpose by the Board of Education. So we currently have 7 reserve funds as listed on the slide. I just want to quickly review each and give you a balance at the current moment. So the tax certiorari reserve, a tax certiorari is when a company has a grievance on their assessed value of their property. They file a legal proceeding to have a judge decide if there's a reduction is appropriate. Since the money has already been taxed to the company, any refunds need to come from the district. So the district is allowed to have a reserve, tax certiorari reserve, in order to cover that. Without the reserve, the district would have to theoretically make a reduction in order to pay that tax certiorari reserve. So this is something we utilize on a yearly basis. We reevaluate every reserve on a yearly basis, or every tax certiorari case on a yearly basis as well, in combination with the assessors in each of our towns.
And typically, Kelly, what percentage do we put aside for the tax cert reserve? So we anticipate, let's say we anticipate $1 million in applied tax certs. People have applied for them, $1 million. How much do we typically put into this reserve? I think it's about half of that, isn't it?
It depends on a case-to-case basis. We work well with our assessors to kind of establish that, but we're usually between 20 and 40%, depending on the case. We have a good relationship with the assessors who kind of have more of a feel of where they think the case will settle.
Right.
So we're usually in that range.
Right. So just to point out, it's not every request that we are meeting in our reserve.
Right. Absolutely. We're not reserving 100% of the requests, because some of the requests, it'll be a 85% reduction that they're requesting in the assessed value. So we're not totally funding that 100%.
Kelly, what's the time lag on this? So if there's a significant increase if there's a significant decline in property values over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, and you see a dramatic uptick like you did in the housing crisis back in 2009, where homeowners are filing these, how much time do you have until you sort of have to catch up with the reality that these numbers could look very different? Do you have a couple of years, or is it a matter of months?
Yeah, no, these usually take a long time. So every year we set aside, we meet with the assessor, and they come up with these numbers. And there's certain dates that they have to meet in order to qualify for this. So if in the next 6 to 12 months there is a significant decline, we still would have that opportunity in July, let's say, to reevaluate the reserve and apply more reserve balances for the following year. So we do have some time to plan for them. But usually these cases don't settle right away. We do still have cases from 2010 still sitting on our books that haven't been settled. So it's usually something that's kind of a slower process. Insurance reserve, again, this is a reserve just maintained to cover liabilities, casualty, and any uninsured loss. We did use this reserve last year, actually the prior year, in relation to the bus fires. That's why we have this reserve for things unforeseen that the insurance doesn't fully cover. Unfortunately, we had that reserve to replace some of our buses. Property loss reserve, our transportation department is in a flood zone. The district had a insurance coverage and a premium that was around $26,000 that continually increased on a year-to-year basis, as insurance usually does. So the district created this reserve with a balance of $600,000. If there was a loss at the transportation facility, the maximum we would receive from the insurance company was $600,000. So we've kind of created our own self-insurance for the transportation facility with this reserve. Retirement contribution reserve, excuse me. This is just to help us to mitigate any increase in the employees' retirement system, the New York State local retirement system. So this is pretty much every employee that's non-instructional. If there is a huge increase in terms of those retirement expenses, we're able to use this reserve to mitigate that on a year-to-year basis. And last year, fortunately, a sub-fund was created for the TRS section. Previous to last year, that reserve could not be utilized for increases in the teacher's retirement system. Fortunately, this is a sub-fund that was added to the retirement contribution. So we're able to contribute that on a year-to-year basis. We currently have about $680,000 there. With the rate TRS going, I would anticipate going up in the next couple of years. This is a reserve we definitely could dip into to mitigate a large increase on a year-to-year basis. The Employees Benefit Accrual Reserve, excuse me, Liability Reserve. This reserve accounts for expenses for compensation. We have some employees that have compensation for the unused sick days upon their retirement. This reserve has dwindled down as those employees have retired, but we currently have liability of that exact amount, $632,000. That's something we've reviewed with our auditors on a year-to-year basis and confirm that number, and you'll see that decrease next year and the year after. The Unemployment Insurance Reserve, again, if we had a large spike in terms of unemployment, the district has this reserves to kind of mitigate that expense to a budget on a year-to-year basis. We currently have $261,000 in that reserve. Finally, the Capital Reserve. This is the reserve we just used to pay for the turf field. It's set aside based for construction projects, any purchases, or it can be used to pay debt as well. This reserve was established by the board and can only be used with a voter authorization of a vote at the budget usually at the budget time to use this reserve. So last year it was about $1.6 million more. Obviously, when we paid for the field, that balance was reduced. As a whole, this is the total. We're at $19.6 million. This is a decrease from the prior year of about $2.2 million. The purchase or the utilization of the capital reserve for the turf field, as well as some changes in tax certiorari's and reduction in EBLAR. So it is a reduction of about $2.2 million.
I think, that reserve, right now, just going back to it, it's something that's really important for us to have, especially in the event that in the future we need any kind of emergency repairs or anything like that in the district. I think that it was, at one time it was beneficial to do that so that we could start to save for changes in the district. And now it seems beneficial to have that for the sake of emergencies when we need them. Our operating budgets aren't going to necessarily look the same that they did in the past.
So in terms of the factors associated with tax rates, the tax levy, assessments, and equalization rates. Equalization rates are the total assessed value divided by the market value. So the state annually establishes equalization rates for each of the towns as a percentage that the town is assessed based on the total market value. For example, town of North Castle is at 2.3%. This means the assessed value of a home in North Castle is 2.3% of their total market value, or what you could sell it worth. So in contrast, Newcastle is 19.05% of the total market value. So it's just a measurement of how the town has assessed their properties. So this slide is the formulas for total assessed value and the tax rate. If you want to go back and take a look at that, that's how this information is calculated. In terms of projected equalized full value, this is all the property that makes up the Byram Hill School District, the majority of which is located in the town of North Castle, 86%, or about $4.4 billion of property value. That's about $3,700 properties. The next largest is Mount Pleasant, 13%, about 791 properties. Newcastle at 0.6%, 40 properties, and then Bedford at 0.4% with 38 properties. So a total full value of $5.2 billion. Here are the changes in full value per town. As you can see, North Castle has another decrease in terms of assessed value, and with 3,700 properties, that's a fairly large decrease. A decrease as well in Newcastle, excuse me, almost 1%, but again, about 40 properties, so not as big of a drop. And then some increases in Bedford of 0.6%, and a pretty large increase in Mount Pleasant at 0.83%. And again, that's 791 properties. So that's a fairly large increase for Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant in the last couple of years have had increases in assessed values, whereas the majority of the towns have seen obviously reductions in assessed values in the from 1819 to 1920. So the estimated tax rate per 100,000, because of the shift in the assessed values, the share of the tax levy is adjusted, and that reflects in these changes. With a tax levy of 1.4%, these are the tax rates per town, a 0.74% increase for the town of North Castle, a 2.7% increase for Newcastle, a 0.95% increase for Bedford, and a 3.9% increase for Mount Pleasant. Again, Mount Pleasant having such a large increase in assessed value caused a larger increase in terms of the tax rate. Just as a review in terms of tax rates for the last 5 years, as you can see, the projected tax rates for the town, with the exception of Bedford, are less than the prior year. Bedford being negative in the last 2 years, 1819 and 1920. And again, these shifts in the tax rate are directly related to the changes in assessed value, which is something the district has no control of. It's created by the assessors in each of the towns.
Which, Kelly, I think that is such an important slide when you look at how assessed values really impact. I mean, look at Bedford from 2015-16 at an increase of 12.18%. to 16-17, 4.46%, a minus 4.46. I mean, just showing those fluctuations over time is really important for taxpayers to see that these assessed values really impact that, along with school budgets. You know, keep in mind that for the past couple of years, as we've had these tax rates and have been shifting up and down, we have been keeping the budgets down in Byram Hills. I mean, like, Kelly, where are we now at, like $2.2 million under every single year for what we were able to not tax up to the tax levy for the past 3 years alone. So I think that, you know, the assessed values, it's really clear here what a drastic change they can have on that tax levy, that tax percent change.
And just keep in mind with North Castle and Bedford, you know, being 38, 40 properties, that can shift significantly because on a yearly basis, if a property sells for much larger than the assessed value or much lower, it can have a significant effect on these, 38 to 40 properties in each town. So that can explain some of the shifts you'll see in these years. The true tax rate, true value tax rate. Unfortunately, the data on this is not great. There were 8 school districts that didn't report data, but we are at the true tax rate of 15.84%. Essentially, what this is the tax rate is you pick up your home and you put it in another district, and it's the tax rates associated with moving your home. It's comparing kind of all districts into the same boat. So this year we are ranked number 36 out of 46. Again, there were 8 districts that didn't provide the data. Usually this number is 54. So we're essentially in the same boat if all the districts actually reported. Last year there was 54 and we were in 43rd. So
we've been 44, 45, 46 for a very long time.
Yep. And essentially we still are. It's just, we're missing those 8 districts that makes this look a little different at this point. And here's just a look at where we are as compared to the other districts. Again, missing 8 districts, it makes it look a little different. But again, you'll see it here. It's just a big shift. We are in the bottom 1/4% in terms of true tax rate, which in this case, being the bottom quarter is a good thing for this. And then finally, proposed tax levy of 1.4%, which again is about $115,000 below the maximum rate, which is 1.5%. Zero flat budget increase, budget to budget for next year, and a total budget the same amount as this year, $94,534,535. So we do have our budget hearing number 4 next Tuesday. Where we'll discuss our final proposed budget. We may make some adjustments based on further discussions. So our final adoption of the budget is April 21st, but our next budget presentation is next Tuesday. Budget adoption the 21st, final budget hearing 5 on May 5th, and again the budget vote as scheduled now, May 19th at HCC from 6:30 to 9 p.m. If you have any questions related to the budget, please feel free to email me. I will post this on the board's website, the budget website, and that's it. Any questions?
All right. Yeah, look, I think as you said, Kelly, this is a year where obviously with all the volatility and with not as crystal clear a picture of what the state's going to do, we're going to get more information in the coming days and continue to analyze the information and figure out whether it makes sense to adjust anything or whether it makes sense to leave the budget as is. But this will be a work in progress.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. So I think that takes us to staff reports, and I'll turn it over to you, Jen. But I just have to mention I have to drop, unfortunately, and I apologize, but it's for something that is seriously urgent. So I'm going to just now hand the gavel over to Lara. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And I think I will start with superintendent report. Is that okay, Lara?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so first, to the community, we miss your children. It is awful not to be with them. It is awful not to be functioning in our regular school environment. We have had to transition quite quickly to a very different platform than what we are used to. And we are making those transitions, and Tim is going to talk to us a lot about that when he does his report. So I'm going to defer to him for that. I wanted to just let the board and the public know that I have been in numerous conversations with, depending on the day, either representatives from Governor Cuomo's office about school closures or with the Commissioner of Education and the Chancellor of Education to talk about some of the education questions. And most recently, in a conversation with the Commissioner, the Executive Committee met with her and asked her questions that we wanted some feedback on. We know that the 3 to 8 testing has been suspended. We know that the Regents exams are not going to be used for accountability reasons. Whatever that means, we'll get more information on. But there were many questions that we asked that we were told we were going to be receiving guidance about. I think it's important for the board to know. We want to know, are these remote learning plans that we were required to submit to the state, are they going to be approved? Are they going to be counted toward instructional hours? They said we will receive guidance on that. We had to actually upload them and submit them. So the question is, what are you doing with those submissions? We're waiting. We asked about APPR requirements and whether they would be suspended for this year. And we were told we'll receive guidance on that. We asked if the governor is going to make a decision and if they've been in conversations about the extension of the current closure. Is there going to be an extension? Keep in mind, Byram Hills is out until after our spring break, but we want to know when we expect to hear from the commissioner. They said they will let us know. Will federal funds roll over to the new year with no restrictions? What are we doing about budget vote and upcoming elections? What about a waiver for CSE meetings? We are continuing those meetings, but we're not sure what the state's plan is regarding those. And we were told on all of those counts that we will be waiting for guidance. So just so you know that we are putting those questions out there to New York State Education Department and trying to get some answers. The next thing I wanted to talk about, which is going to be a segue to Tim, which is the Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents recently did a survey of all the superintendents in Westchester County to see where are we as far as alignment is concerned with this e-learning. Some people are calling it e-learning, some are calling it I-learning. Where are we in that process and are we aligned? There were 43 districts that responded. One that was very interesting to us as we are moving forward with the next levels of e-learning, of having synchronous and asynchronous instructional lessons, we found that we were in the minority, actually. When asked if schools are requiring video conferencing, like in Zoom, FaceTime, Google Hangouts, etc., which we are very much have transitioned to quite a bit at the middle school, high school, and are transitioning to at the elementary level. It's interesting that only 7 districts out of the 43 that responded said at the elementary level, yes, they are doing that. And only 9 districts at the secondary level out of 43 said they are doing that. And that's really interesting. You know, I know that we are dealing with very differing opinions about e-learning. You know, is what we're doing through e-learning really e-learning? It's not online learning. We all know it's not online learning. And what are other districts in the area doing? And we are amongst those that are really trying to push forward to have instruction happen for these children and to get them that FaceTime. We spend so much time talking about the mental health of children, and we need to get our teachers there. So I want to move to Tim now, because Tim's going to talk about pretty much the Herculean efforts. From a parent at home, we're getting lots of different feedback. I'm getting some feedback that, wow, my kids have so much work to do. I can't believe this. You know, this is great or this is terrible. Too much work. Then we get some feedback. My kids don't have enough work to do. Either this is great or this is terrible. So, you know, in all of that feedback, it's been very important to us. And I encourage people, you know, if you have questions about what's happening, to go to ask your classroom teacher, go to the first line first, ask the classroom teacher what you can be expecting and when, ask the building principals what you can be expecting and when, because we are very much in the thick of this rollout and this development. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Tim, because you have some really exciting things to share about what we've been doing this week and where this is going to take us.
Sure, thanks. And I asked the board just jump in if you have any questions. I want to talk about 4 areas that I think are important to frame for our community. First is the scope of what we're trying to do. I want to look at the scope of the work. I want to look at our professional learning plan. And then I want to show you the framework of what this is going to look like going forward in the next few weeks at each building. And Jen talked about state tests, but I want to make a comment about the AP exams, because that's been something that we're all talking about now. In terms of the scope of this work, We don't usually have a crisis in curriculum, but now we are moving at speeds that are really unprecedented for the work that we do in terms of curriculum and instruction and assessments. Curriculum is really usually methodical and paced. You spend time researching best practices, looking deeply at programs. You're bringing people together to think through how this impacts our kids that are sitting before us now in our community. We go slow in a thoughtful and deliberate way. But in the last 4 days, or in the matter of 4 days at the start of this, we transitioned from a typical K-12 district to trying to become an online university. And that would normally take months, if not years, to plan and organize and train for and hire experienced people. You know, we have to keep in mind that our teachers are not trained in being online professors. It's a real skill to do that. We're trained in the learning domain of face-to-face environments and interactions and what a classroom is like. And I know the board has heard me say a lot that we promote a dialogic classroom. We want the interactions with students between students and teachers, and it's a very nuanced environment in a classroom. Our curriculum also, I want to talk about the curriculum, has taken years, if not a decade, to get to where it is now. We don't have just a low-level rote learning curriculum. It's really built on conceptual learning and knowledge. It's built on problem solving and deep learning. We work on skill development, but then there's care about the interactions and differentiation and feedback to students. There's so many complex parts of a classroom that our teachers are skilled on and that we talk about every day. And overnight, we're asking our teachers to now replicate that in an online virtual environment like we're doing tonight. And that's extremely difficult and complex. You know, examples I'm hearing that are been shared with my friends and friends who are teachers is that they're getting sent home a packet of, you know, do these 50 math problems or do these 87 science questions. That's not what we want to replicate, and that's not the curriculum we do in our classrooms. So we certainly don't want that to be the curriculum we're sending home. I did just get an email this evening from a teacher who tried her first virtual class, her Zoom class, as she calls it, at the high school. And she was just sharing her noticings about it, and that the kids were excited to see her, and the kids were excited to interact with each other. So this is all new to all of us. It was all very positive, and the teacher was saying the things she wants to now integrate into that. So we need teachers to start exploring live interactions where it's appropriate, and then we're going to grow that as we gain the experience and knowledge of how to actually have rich online discussions and evaluate student learning in an internet age and in the internet environment. So we're grappling with this. It's not as easy as just taking your lessons that you normally would do and putting it into, you know, just submitting it to kids online. You have to change the directions and instructions. You have to create new activities. You have to be intentional about what you're asking students to do in a very new way that's foreign to our teachers. And we're all learning that now in the last week or so. So let me, well, that's just one piece of just the curriculum. And then in the meantime, we're learning and starting to explore the new technology skills. Not every teacher knows how to do a Zoom class or how to set up a Google Meet. So we're doing all of that training at the same time. So it's really a new mode of teaching and learning that we are trying to learn, and we are building the plane as we are flying it right now. So there's a lot of challenges. So I wanted to say that up front in terms of just what we're looking at and how huge of a task we're taking on in a matter of just a week and a half. So I do want to talk about our professional learning plan, and that in 3 days we were able to create almost this entire online learning conference. We are offering this week alone 47 different workshops that are scheduled from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and they run in 30 minutes to 1 hour's length of time. And on Monday we had 31% of our faculty participated in those workshops, and we only announced it on Sunday. Tuesday, today, we had about 30% of our faculty take workshops. In addition, our technology teachers at each building are working one-on-one with teachers, and they're working in small groups with teachers to train them. They're also working with families. We deployed over 500 Chromebooks last Tuesday to families that needed Chromebooks, and that was a massive undertaking on that weekend alone. And we've had to help some of our families whose Chromebooks either weren't functioning or get connected on the internet. So that has been sort of a massive undertaking of our tech team as well. I am going to just quickly share my screen with you and just let you look at this PD schedule, just so you can have a sense of what it looks like in your mind.
I'm sorry to interrupt him. I just have a question. I'm taken back by the 30% of teachers attending these PD sessions. And can we not require them to attend these if this is something that we have no choice. We have to move to this platform.
So let me say with that 30%, first of all, this is while they're also teaching kids right now. So we're doing this during the day. They're teaching, they're figuring out their home lives as they're learning how to work at home. To me, that number was gigantic. I thought that was actually a large percentage, that 30% of our faculty would do that. And now you have to remember, that's just taking the workshops. There are teachers working independently with their technology teacher. I don't have numbers on how many that is, but it's happening. And there are teachers who are learning this on their own. I've been in conversation with teachers and I've sent them links of how to do Zooms, Zoom meetings. So a lot of teachers, particularly our teachers at the secondary level who have had a little more experience with this, are learning it on their own. I would say most of that 30%, and that's 30% of our entire faculty, is coming from the elementary grades because the secondary is a little more independent. Just because of their experience doing it. Let me show you the schedule quickly. I do think it's impressive that we were able to put this together in a short time. I'll just share it real quick. And this schedule, if you can see that, sort of shows that we have these 4 different groups of workshops that are all color-coded by just teachers sharing best practices and helping each other. I have volunteer teachers doing that. How-to sessions, which is on the tech tools, and then the instructional focus, the ones that are saying, how do we harness the power of online learning in these tech tools to actually, in an instructional environment? How do I get feedback to kids? How do I interact with kids in a discussion? How do I get kids talking to each other? All those other instructional aspects. And then we have consultants that we've been working with for a while doing sessions. They're also do online learning and instructional focus. So this is pretty massive as it goes from 8 a.m. down to the evening hours because teachers wanted some time in the evenings. And, Monday through Friday, we made it easy for them to register. And we're doing that for the week after as well as we get feedback about where teachers need to adjust their learning. So let me talk then in the third part about this framework and where we're going. So the questions that we're asking ourselves now as we move to the next level of this work is, how do we maintain a sense of community? That is opportunities for our students to connect with their teachers and for students to connect with one another in an online environment. And how do we maintain high levels of engagement with the content, which is really complex given our curriculum in an online learning environment that we're not really trained in doing. So we're trying to learn that approach as well as learn the technical skills. So we want to maintain community and we want to get that engagement with content. And engagement with content is not just presenting content and then kids doing something, but as Jen talked about earlier, it's, what we might do in a reading group at the elementary level is the teacher would do a mini lesson for 10 to 12 minutes where they present something and interact and answer questions with kids. And then kids go off and do some independent work while the teacher does 5 different reading groups, meets with one group at a time, and then brings kids back at the end afterwards. And there's a lot of management that happens in that piece as you have differentiated reading groups and kids with different needs. That's really hard to manage with young learners in an online environment that we've never done before. Tonight we were doing our online presentation and we had trouble getting in our presenter. And so you can imagine doing that with 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, trying to get every kid to come into a classroom. We're going to have issues with that, and it's a very new medium for us. So if I could talk about Coman Hill. So where we're at with Coman Hill is transitioning from just emailing parents an activity list to now getting teachers to do recorded videos where the teacher can present a message to the kids so the kids see their teacher, and then eventually getting to some synchronous times with our, by synchronous we mean live interactions, so that there could be some group interactions. Now, do we do that as a full group, or maybe we do it as small groups? We're trying to work through what's going to be manageable. Can we get a group of 24 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds into a Google Classroom at the same time, or into a Google Meet? There's a lot of challenges with that. Mary Beth's going to be modeling some of that work as principal. She's going to be reading a story to kids. I believe that's tomorrow. She's doing a show and tell, and then she's going to have kids do some letter writing. So she's doing some interactions as principal. And then tomorrow we're launching a podcast that some of our teachers put together over the past few days. This first episode is 30 minutes, and it's going to cover topics from telling stories from when, I think she titled the first chapter, Teachers Were Kids Too. Chapter 2 is going to be on how to do composting and how you can create your own compost at home. And chapter 3 is going to be jokes and riddles. And chapter 4 is going to be having kids report back to them in a Google Classroom. That was all put together over last weekend. The teacher's so excited about what she was doing, she called me on Saturday afternoon to tell me they were going to be ready to launch this week. And now they're developing the second podcast for next week. That's pretty remarkable to get done in just a matter of days, really. And so we're looking at Coman Hill of getting more interaction so that kids can see their teacher. But there are some real challenges with young kids doing that and operating the technology. At Wampus, Peggy's sending out an email tomorrow that will start to look at more structured time. We're having now this week the specialists in physical education and math and literacy, music and technology will start doing video recorded sessions and getting activities to their students, but seeing those teachers. And the math and literacy folks will be doing some small lessons so they can actually create lessons that they're recording this week. Next week, we're going to be transitioning every classroom teacher to be doing their own Google Classroom. So now teachers can connect directly to their kids in a Google Classroom starting next week. We're going to start looking at ways we can post assignments from each individual teacher. They're going to start doing, as they're now taking these courses this week, they're learning how to do recordings, how they're going to record their own messages and post those into their Google Classroom. They're also going to launch a class novel. So every grade level will be doing a class novel together. And then also experimenting with some live classes. Teachers were excited when we started to show some tools. So that's why we have all this professional development happening this week. So to keep in mind, teachers don't know how to do this. We haven't done these type of live recordings. I never did one before. So I started to experiment doing my own training sessions as well. Also next week at Wampus, you're going to see teachers having office hours for families so that it's consistent and families can have conferences with teachers. We're also starting to look at our math program investigations doing the online games. So we're having our math specialists trained on that so we can start rolling that out next week. So kids will be getting our own math program that we put a lot of time into making a decision about that program. There is an online game component. So we had to learn that now, and now we're learning to implement that with kids, as well as a literacy online program as well. This is all very new learning that our teachers have to not only learn how to do that, how to sort of roll it out with all of our kids at the same time. So Peggy is working with her teachers now for a more structured schedule and what that would look like. And you're going to see some of that coming out in her email tomorrow. At the middle school, what Ms. Lapple's doing and Mr. Ancona, they had put together a proposed schedule that they're now talking to the teachers about. They've gotten some feedback about kids having more structured time throughout the scope of the day. So they have been talking to the teams this week, and it's in development right now. And Kim believes that we can launch this next week. So once we get teachers understanding it and how they can teach within that scheduled environment, that is something that is going to be rolled out on Monday. More teachers at the middle school are doing not just recorded messages, but looking at how to do live instruction with their kids. And we should see more of that next week as well as looking at ways we can get group interaction with students. We do so many group activities at the middle school. How do we organize and structure that in an online environment? And that's the work that the middle school teachers are learning this week. So we will see more of that next week. Finally, at the high school, I would say our high school was probably most comfortable with jumping in with live sessions, synchronous sessions. We saw that from day one in our social studies department. I just received this email, as I mentioned before, from the a world languages teacher who did this live session and was very excited about the feedback. I work with some teachers on setting up Zoom accounts and how to do Zoom sessions and the features in Zoom that gives them some control. So these are all things happening at the secondary level. Mr. Walsh is talking to the chairs and directors about a possible schedule, because we're now starting to see, as more teachers at the high school do live sessions, we're starting to run into conflicts with teachers scheduling things at the same time. So that's going to be a big problem. So Mr. Walsh is starting to work with the chairs and directors on what would a schedule look like so we don't have that conflict, because we don't suddenly want to have 5 classes scheduled at the same time. The sweet spot seems to be about between 9 and, or be between like 10 and 11 is when people want to schedule their meetings after
That's
breakfast.
because that's when all the kids are waking up.
Kids are waking up, breakfast is over at home with all the kids, so now it's time to start learning. So we're working on that schedule. We're also training on more sophisticated online tools at the secondary level. Zoom has more control, and so we're looking at not just the free part, but the subscription service so that we have more tools that would be available to our teachers. The other big issue that we're hearing and talking about is at the secondary level is how we handle assessments and grading. Right now, we're just looking, grading is very complex, if you can imagine, in an online environment. So we are just slowing down that discussion. Right now, we're just trying to understand where our students are in terms of their learning and how we adapt our instruction to their learning. And we're looking at assignments as complete or incomplete. And in the future, we're going to start really having to think about how do we grade in this online environment. That's a huge discussion. Assessment in general is huge in education. So to think about that now in a whole new medium that we're not comfortable with or have experience with, we have a lot to think through on that. I have seen some emails coming from admissions at the college level that colleges are talking now about pass-fail for the rest of the year. This is something that we have to put on the plate. What does that mean for our community, for our kids at all different grade levels? So it's a big issue, and we're just going slow in our decision-making around that.
Can I just say one thing about that?
Yeah.
Again, they let me out when I get into town. I was talking to some parents. I really don't know them well, but of course, being 6 feet apart. And they knew it was on the board, and they said, I have a high school junior, and this is so giant, pass fail. It's risky. And I saw the Columbia information that Jen circulated.
Yep.
But what are you hearing about how schools are handling this regarding, of all the years, the junior year, which
Yep.
is so crucial to these kids?
Yeah. So Ira, what I'm hearing now, and I want to talk about how that sort of started.
And I guess the most important thing, how are you communicating that?
Right. So right now, it's a huge discussion on my listservs in the region. Nobody's figured this out. Everybody's just asking the question. So that's my first point. My second point is that the way the pass-fail got out was that Mr. Walsh was thinking about this early. He was thinking about it last week. And he did what Chris does so well, is he gets input from people. He talked to teachers about it, and he asked his student advisory committee. He has a student advisory committee he runs things by all the time and meets with regularly. And he asked them, what would you think about a pass-fail for third quarter? Now, this was last week, and last week the world was very different than it is now. We really were assuming we're coming back on April 13th. That's what we know so far, and that might be the case, but we don't know. And last week, that was our assumption. Kids gave him good feedback, and it made us slow down in making that decision, because junior year is probably the most critical year that we got a lot of feedback on. So we just said, you know what, we have a lot to consider. Let's just hold off on that decision. We need a little bit longer, and we need to know what's going to happen the rest of this the rest of this year. So I think it really depends on when are we coming back, and then what decisions do we make in light of that? Because I think third quarter and fourth quarter together now, we just have to figure that out. And once we get input from community members, students, and teachers, and our administrative team, we'll put that out in a communication from Mr. Walsh and Ms. Lappel where it really affects grades.
Yeah.
And transfer. It's a big decision. So we've just slowed down. We have to give it a lot of thought. We can't make it in a bubble.
Totally understood. Thank you, Tim. It's a great answer.
And my final point about this point, and then I'll talk about the AP exams. Real worries coming from teachers are this is a new way of communicating. We've always been very cautious in our online communications with students, and suddenly we just expect to transition to an online environment. And we're cautious. We want to go cautiously, but we know we need to start engaging with our kids. So that's just something we have to grapple with as an education community, of how we do that in ways that keep our students safe. We're using tech tools now that we haven't really used in full force before. So we want to make sure these are safe for kids, safe for adults, that we're all, doing this for the right reasons. So those are some things that we have to work through. What's the protocol from the student's end, from the teacher's end, and from the parent's end? Should parents be popping into their kid's classroom when a kid's doing an online lesson? That's something real that has actually happened last week. So we have to talk about all those issues, and the whole data privacy issue, which is really has been at the forefront, is now almost being ignored as we just jump into these new technologies. We have to take those really seriously. And then
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish.
No,
I wanted to say something.
I was just going to transition to state ed and college board. So Jen already reported out on what the state is doing. I just want to make one more plea to state ed: is please don't make the guidance and the plans onerous for us. We have so much work to do that if you're going to put out a volume of guidance, which they tend to do, it's really going to be hard to implement it in practice. We just need some clear decisions about, the role of Regents exams going forward and APPR, but try not to make us have to submit some, new negotiated plans. It's just going to be too hard to do. The College Board is, information we put out earlier, postponed the SAT administrations, and they canceled face-to-face AP exams. They did extend portfolio submissions, which we've communicated to our students. And now Mr. Walsh is working with the chairs and directors now. He's already had a meeting this week with all of them to talk to teachers about how we're going to implement AP exams. The College Board still doesn't have this all worked out. They're promising plans by April 3rd. They are going to shorten them, and they're only going to have the content go up through March. That is the last statement that they published. So, and they're going to look at a later administration as an option. So it looks like from their most recent web posting that they're going to have two administrations, an early one as scheduled and a later one, but only they're going to reduce the length of them and do it online. So we have to just see what the priority content's going to be. Our teachers are already preparing for that and what that's going to look like. So we're having conversations, but we need a little more guidance, which we're promised by April 3rd, and then we'll start adjusting our curriculum in that time. So I went through that pretty quickly, but a lot of issues that I thought were.
I wish the whole community could have heard that, Tim, because I think that would have put a lot of questions to rest if they could have heard that presentation. I thought it was fabulous. Thank you.
I agree. I this has been a Herculean effort, a task rather. And I think it was done expeditiously and, methodically. We appreciate it so much that you are, Tim and Jen, that you're receptive to hearing the community's concerns about the transition, and that you're supporting the staff with professional development. We are so in this time of crises where everyone's concerned and at home. I think, trying to get us more on some sort of schedule, which it sounds like it's evolving very quickly, which is amazing, will be a real godsend to parents who are working from home now, which we're all in that boat. So we thank you all so much for that. and very pleased with the progress that's going on. Anyone else want to jump in? And
Lara, just a note that this was recorded, even though it's live streamed, it's recorded also. And even though Tim is going to be putting something together for each of the principals, because now we would like the e-learning communications to be coming out from the principals to the parents, teachers to the parents. That also, if anybody inquires, it's great for them to go back to this segment of the video to hear what has been happening and what's been planned. Tim, you did a great job.
Yeah,
yes,
I've actually been, as Tim was talking, I was directing people to go listen to his part of the recording if they don't want to listen to the whole board meeting, to skip to Tim's
So
section.
maybe we can split mine out and put it separate. So,
yeah, I think it would really be helpful for the
we're trying to
community.
streamline that. The principals were hesitant to put things out without it again going through, the district office and our team collaboration that we always do so well. We want to have a unified message. We don't want to confuse parents. Once Mr. Walsh had that student advisory committee, it was within minutes, it was starting to circulate and we were all getting emails about it.
Oh, I must have gotten 12.5 emails about how unfair it was that we were going to pass fail before we were ever even, not even doing it.
So we're working on a district framework for blended learning and what that looks like. And then we're going to now start having our principals communicate that, because I think it's from the principal, the way it's applied in every building is a little bit different. And I think that's where the structure will come from. But we all want the same message. We don't want to be sending out different messages and being confused. And so it just takes us time to plan that and think through a lot of these massive issues to transition from that rich classroom and school environment that we've been so proud of to now suddenly trying to do it in this interaction and format. It is really large. And we
I want to thank parents who have reached out. We look at that feedback, and a lot of the time that's what we use to start questioning how we're doing things and moving forward. It's either validation for what we know we're already planning, or something we might, should be focusing on a little bit more. So I encourage parents, parents feel very comfortable reaching out to me. I encourage you, but even your classroom teachers and your building principals, we care very much about your feedback. We usually see kids on the receiving end because they're in school, and now we don't. So that feedback is really critical to us also.
I just want to add very briefly, Tim, a big thank you. This has been thrown upon all of us. It's complex. You're working with the best tools you have, and you've given the flexibility and the energy around this that really should be applauded. So if I can provide you with any encouragement to stay motivated with your team at this late hour, I'm motivated by your energy and your care of making this work. So thank you.
I'm glad I came off energetic after this. I'm up since 7, and I have a 7:45 a.m. call, and then an 8:30 collaborative meeting with the K-5 curriculum, e-learning curriculum team. The new committee just formed today.
Well, we'll try to get this going. We appreciate that so much, and we appreciate you, Tim, so much always.
We care about the kids, and we want to make this a valuable experience for children. That we put a lot of thought into this, and it's not just let me give you a packet of 50 problems, which would have been what happened if we said everybody now online. We want that. We want it to be meaningful, and our teachers do. So,
well, we appreciate that so much. And I like hearing the dichotomy there, that we at the same time want to promote and do staff development for this online learning and reaching children, but on the same token, we want to be safe about it and keep that in mind. So we always put the children first, and that's what we pride Byram on, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, okay, let's see. Jen, did you have anything else to add? Because I know you went to Tim right away for a staff report.
Yep. No, I only wanted to add what my questions were to the commissioner, and then to segue to Tim.
Okay. And do we have any other staff reports? Kelly, no, that's it. Okay.
I think we have a president to give a president report.
I am back.
Oh, you're back. Oh,
I'm
good.
back.
We'll go back to Scott. Good.
So I think nothing else to report that we haven't talked about this evening. And we talked about the concept of what's going to happen to budget vote and board elections to the extent that there's a significant closure and we don't have any clarity around that. There's another session that will happen this week with the school board association with presidents around the county, just trying to work through this crisis and share best practices. So we'll participate in that. And then I think we have to just keep a close eye on the next few days in Albany. And I think, various members of the board have been, and certainly boards in other districts have been in touch with local legislative officials, just trying to make sure that I think we're looking for two things, right? One is to make sure we can maintain financial support. The other is to make sure that, we get some regulatory relief around some of the things that this crisis has, put in jeopardy. So, a la the regents exams and flexibility around that, and the 180-day rule, and a bunch of other things as well. So we'll be closely monitoring that and do whatever we can to advocate for our district. Anybody else have any board reports? All right. With that, communication to the board, I received one just related to recent events. Anybody else have any communication? All right.
Mr. President, I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Everyone have a very good night.
Everybody stay healthy and safe.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
10:55.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.